The star charts of the Galactic Concord stretched across thousands of light years and contained the locations of millions of worlds. But there was one region that every species refused to discuss. A dark corner of the galaxy marked with a single crimson symbol that meant only one thing: forbiddance. High Commander Zorath of the Valkyrie Imperial Navy stood at the bridge of his flagship and stared at that crimson marking on the holographic display before him, his four golden eyes narrowing as he considered what lay beyond that boundary that no ship had ever crossed and returned from. For 300 cycles, the Valkyrie Empire had watched vessels disappear into that region of space, and not a single one had ever sent back a message or a distress signal or even a fragment of wreckage that might explain what had consumed them. Scout ships had vanished first, then exploration vessels, then warships sent to investigate the disappearances, and finally entire battle fleets that the Empire had dispatched with orders to conquer whatever lurked in that forbidden darkness. The Elder Council had eventually declared that region of space off-limits to all Valkyrie citizens, and they had placed warning beacons along the border that broadcast a simple message in every known language: turn back or face destruction. But Zorath was not like the other commanders who had accepted this mystery without question, and he had spent decades studying every scrap of information about the Forbiddance Zone that he could find in the Imperial archives. He had discovered something that the Council had tried to bury: a transmission that had been received from a dying species called the Korthani nearly 500 cycles ago, a species that had tried to colonize the Forbidden Zone and had been completely erased from existence within a single generation. The transmission had contained only a few words, spoken by a voice filled with terror. They are not like us. They do not think like us. They do not fight like us. And they will never stop until everything that threatens them is dead. Zorath had brought this discovery to the Elder Council and had demanded permission to lead an expedition into the Forbidden Zone with the most advanced ship in the Imperial fleet, a vessel called the Eternal Vigil that was equipped with stealth technology so sophisticated that it could hide from any sensor in the known galaxy. The Council had refused at first, calling him reckless and foolish, but Zorath had persisted, arguing that the Empire could not remain ignorant of such a threat forever. And eventually, the Elders had agreed to his mission. Now he stood on the bridge of the Eternal Vigil as it approached the border of the Forbidden Zone, surrounded by a crew of 300 Valkyrie who were the finest warriors and scientists that the Empire had ever produced. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Krev, stepped up beside him with concern written across his scaled face, and he spoke in a low voice that only Zorath could hear. "Commander, the crew is nervous, and I must admit that I share their unease about crossing that boundary." Zorath turned to face his lieutenant and placed a clawed hand on his shoulder. "We are Valkyrie, Krev, and we have conquered 100 worlds and defeated a dozen species. So what could possibly exist in that darkness that we cannot overcome?" Krev nodded slowly, but doubt still lingered in his eyes as he returned to his station and began running final checks on the ship's systems. Science Officer Tilla approached from the sensor station, her silver scales gleaming under the bridge lights, and she carried a data tablet that displayed readings from the border region. "Commander, I am detecting unusual subspace distortions near the boundary, patterns that do not match anything in our databases." "Show me what you have found," Zorath commanded, and Tilla transferred the data to the main display. The reading showed waves of energy rippling through subspace in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, as if something was watching the border and waiting for anyone foolish enough to cross it. "Fascinating," Zorath murmured as he studied the display. And then he straightened his posture and addressed his crew. "All hands, this is your commander speaking. And I want you to know that what we do today will change the course of our empire's history. The crew turned to face him, and Zorath saw fear in many of their eyes, but he also saw loyalty and determination, and he knew that they would follow him into that darkness no matter what awaited them. We are about to cross into territory that has swallowed hundreds of ships without a trace, and I will not lie to you by saying that there is no danger. But I will promise you this: if anything tries to destroy us, we will make them regret ever challenging the might of the Valkyrie Empire. A chorus of approval rose from the crew, and Zorath felt pride swell on his chest as he turned back to the view screen. Helm, take us across the border at 1/4 speed and maintain full stealth protocols. The helmsman acknowledged the order, and the Eternal Vigil began to move forward, crossing the invisible line that separated the known galaxy from the mystery that had haunted the Valkyrie for 3 centuries. As soon as they crossed the boundary, every sensor on the ship registered something strange, a faint signal buried deep in the subspace frequencies, so old that it had almost decayed into static. "Commander," Tilla called out with alarm in her voice, "I am detecting what appears to be an automated beacon of some kind, and it is broadcasting a message in a language that predates our earliest records." "Can you translate it?" Zorath demanded, and Tilla worked furiously at her console for several moments before looking up with pale scales. "It is a warning, Commander, from a species that went extinct before our civilization even began. Turn back. It says, they do not sleep, they do not forget, and they are waiting." A chill ran down Zorath's spine, but he refused to show weakness in front of his crew, and he squared his shoulders as he gave his next order. "Continue forward and increase sensor range to maximum, because I want to know everything about whoever or whatever left that beacon." The ship pressed deeper into the Forbidden Zone, and with every passing moment, Zorath felt as if unseen eyes were watching them from the darkness between the stars. He did not know that he was right, and he did not know that the beings who watched them had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. 3 cycles had passed since the Eternal Vigil crossed into the Forbidden Zone, and High Commander Zorath had begun to wonder if all the warnings and all the fear had been nothing more than superstition and legend. The ship had traveled deeper into the unknown territory without encountering any sign of hostile forces, and the crew had started to relax as the initial tension faded into routine. But on the 4th cycle, everything changed. Science Officer Tilla was running a standard sensor sweep when she suddenly froze at her console, her silver scales turning almost white as she stared at the readings that filled her screen. "Commander," she called out with a trembling voice, "you need to see this immediately." Zorath crossed the bridge in 3 quick strides and looked at the display, and what he saw made his 4 eyes widen in disbelief. Dozens of planets appeared on the sensor grid, all of them showing signs of advanced civilization. "This is impossible," Lieutenant Krev whispered as he joined them at the console, "because our intelligence said this region was dead space with no habitable worlds." Tilla shook her head and pulled up more data. "These readings are unmistakable, Commander, and I am detecting orbital stations, ship traffic, communication satellites, and energy signatures that indicate a population of billions spread across multiple star systems." Zorath felt his stomach twist with a mixture of fear and excitement as he realized what this meant. They had not found a dead zone at all, but rather a thriving civilization that had somehow remained hidden from the rest of the galaxy for centuries. "Can you intercept their communications?" he asked, and Tilla nodded before beginning to work on isolating the signals. What came through the speakers made every Valkyrie on the bridge fall silent with confusion and growing dread. The language was unlike anything they had encountered before, sharp and varied with thousands of different dialects and accents, and the translation software struggled to process the sheer complexity of what it was hearing. After several minutes, a rough translation began to appear on the screen, and Zorath read the words with increasing unease. They are talking about trade agreements and political disputes and something called sports and entertainment, and news about conflicts happening on different worlds. They sound so normal, Krev said with disbelief, almost like any other species in the Concord. But Tilla had found something else, and her voice was hollow when she spoke. Commander, I have accessed what appears to be their historical database, and I think you need to see what I have found. She transferred the data to the main screen, and images began to appear that made the Velkari crew gasp in horror. They saw cities burning under clouds of fire and radiation, armies of creatures fighting each other with weapons designed to cause maximum suffering, and records of conflicts that had killed millions upon millions of beings. What manner of monsters would do this to their own kind? One of the crew members whispered, and Tilla's response chilled them all. Commander, according to these records, this species nearly destroyed themselves at least half a dozen times throughout their history, and they did it to each other, not to any external enemy. Zora studied the images with growing horror as he realized what he was looking at, a species that had evolved not by conquering other worlds, but by fighting endless wars against themselves. What do they call themselves? He asked, and Tilla checked her translation. They call themselves humans, Commander, and their territory is called United Terran Space. Humans. Zorath repeated the word slowly, trying to understand how such fragile-looking creatures could have created such destruction. The images showed small beings with soft skin and no natural weapons, no claws or fangs or armored scales. And yet they had developed technology capable of splitting atoms and burning entire continents. They are insane, Krev stated flatly, and there is no other explanation for why a species would repeatedly bring themselves to the edge of extinction. Before Zorath could respond, alarms began blaring across the bridge, and Tilla shouted a warning. Commander, our stealth systems have failed, and I do not know how or why. What do you mean they have failed? Zorath demanded, because that technology is supposed to be undetectable by any known sensor. Tilla worked frantically at her console. I do not understand it. Commander, but something has penetrated our stealth field and is actively scanning our ship. Then, a new contact appeared on the sensor grid, a single small vessel that had seemingly materialized from nowhere. One ship, Krev said with relief, and we can handle one ship if they prove hostile. But even as he spoke, more contacts appeared. 12 ships in total that surrounded the Eternal Vigil in a perfect formation that left no avenue of escape. They moved together, Tilla observed with something close to admiration in her voice, like a single organism with multiple bodies, and their coordination is unlike anything I have ever seen. The human ships were smaller than the Eternal Vigil and appeared less advanced by Velkari standards, but there was something about their formation that suggested a predator circling its prey. A transmission cut through all frequencies on the ship, and a voice spoke in the Velkari language with perfect pronunciation. Unidentified vessel. You have entered United Terran Space without authorization, and you will state your intentions or be classified as hostile, and you have 30 seconds to respond. The voice was calm and cold, without any emotion or hesitation, and Zorath realized that this was not a bluff or a negotiation, but an ultimatum. This is High Commander Zorath of the Velkari Imperial Navy. He responded quickly, and we are here on a peaceful mission of exploration with no hostile intent. There was a pause that lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity to everyone on the bridge. Then the voice returned. Your claim of peaceful intent is noted, Commander Zorath, and you will hold your current position and prepare to receive a diplomatic delegation. And any attempt to flee or power weapons will result in immediate destruction of your vessel. Understood, Zorath replied, and then he turned to face his crew with an expression that none of them had ever seen on their commander's face before. It was fear, pure and undisguised. because Zorath had commanded fleets and conquered star systems and crushed rebellions without hesitation. But something about these humans and their cold efficiency had shaken him to his core. He did not know what awaited him when the human delegation arrived, but he was beginning to understand why no ship had ever returned from this region of space. Whatever these humans were, they were unlike any enemy the Velkhari had ever faced, and Zorath suspected that the true horror was only beginning. The human shuttle docked with the Eternal Vigil 1 hour after the initial contact, and High Commander Zorath stood in the hangar bay with his senior officers, watching as the airlock cycled open. 3 figures emerged from the shuttle, and Zorath studied them with a mixture of curiosity and caution. 2 of them were soldiers wearing black combat armor that seemed almost fused to their bodies, and they moved with a fluid grace that spoke of years of training and combat experience. The third was a female human wearing a gray uniform with various insignia that Zorath assumed indicated rank. As she walked between the soldiers with complete confidence as she approached the Velkhari delegation. She was smaller than Zorath had expected, barely reaching his chest in height, and her soft skin and lack of natural weapons made her appear almost fragile compared to the scaled warriors of the Velkhari Empire. But her eyes told a different story, sharp and calculating as they swept across the hangar bay and assessed every detail with obvious intelligence. "Commander Zorath," she said in perfect Velkhari, "I am Commander Elise Vance of the United Terran Defense Force, and I have been authorized to discuss the terms of your presence in our space." She smiled when she finished speaking, but Zorath noticed that the expression did not reach her eyes, and there was something predatory lurking behind that pleasant mask. "Commander Vance," Zorath responded with a formal bow, "we appreciate your willingness to speak with us rather than simply destroying our ship." Vance tilted her head slightly. "We prefer to understand our visitors before we decide what to do with them, and so far you have not given us any reason to treat you as enemies." "So far," Zorath repeated, and the words hung in the air like a threat. Lieutenant Krev stepped forward. "Commander Vance, we have come seeking answers about what happened to the many ships that entered this region of space and never returned. Because our empire has lost hundreds of vessels over the past 3 centuries. The smile faded from Vance's face, and something cold and hard replaced it. "You want to know what happened to them," she said quietly, "and I suppose you have a right to know, so I will show you." She turned and walked back toward the shuttle without waiting for a response, and Zorath exchanged uncertain looks with his officers before following her. The shuttle carried them to a massive space station orbiting a blue-green world that reminded Zorath of the Velkhari homeworld. And Vance led them through corridors filled with humans, who watched the alien visitors with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. "We are taking you to the archive," Vance explained as they walked, "which is where we keep records of our history and our interactions with other species." She stopped before a large door and turned to face the Velkhari delegation. "What you are about to see may disturb you, but I want you to understand something before we enter. Every species that has ever discovered humanity has looked at us and seen exactly what you are seeing right now. Small, fragile creatures with soft skin and short lifespans and bodies that require constant maintenance just to survive." She paused, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "And every single one of them made the same mistake. They decided that we were weak, that we could be conquered or controlled or exterminated. And they paid the price for that arrogance." The door slid open, and the Velkhari stepped into a vast chamber filled with displays and exhibits that stretched further than their eyes could see. "What is this place?" Science Officer Tilla asked with wonder in her voice. "This is the Museum of Human Conflict," Vance replied, "and it contains records of every war our species has ever fought, against ourselves and against others." She led them through exhibits that showed weapons and armor from different eras of human history, starting with primitive clubs and spears and progressing through swords and firearms and nuclear devices. The Valkyrie watched with growing horror as they saw images of human wars. Trenches filled with dead bodies, cities reduced to rubble, mushroom clouds rising over burning landscapes. "You did this to yourselves," Krev whispered with disbelief, and Vance nodded slowly. "For thousands of years, we fought each other over land and resources and ideology and religion. And we became very good at killing, so good that we nearly wiped ourselves out multiple times." She stopped before a display showing a holographic representation of a planet consumed by fire. "This is what we did to our own world during what we call the Third World War. And it took us 2 centuries to repair the damage." "How did you survive?" Zorath asked. "Because any species that inflicted such destruction upon themselves should have gone extinct." Vance turned to face him with an expression that was almost sad. "We survived because that is what we do, Commander. And no matter how many times we were knocked down, we always got back up and kept fighting." She continued walking and brought them to a new section of the museum, one dedicated to alien species that the Valkyrie had never seen before. "These are the Korthini," Vance said, pointing to a display showing tall insectoid creatures. "And they were the first species to discover us after we developed interstellar travel." "What happened to them?" Tilla asked, although she suspected she already knew the answer. "They decided we were too dangerous to be allowed to exist," Vance replied flatly. "So they launched a surprise attack on our colonies and killed 3 million humans in a single day." The display changed to show human warships engaging the Korthini fleet, and the battle was brutal and one-sided in a way that shocked the Valkyrie. "We did not just defeat them," Vance continued. "We hunted them across every star system they occupied and destroyed. Every ship, and every station, and every colony until there was nothing left." The Valkyrie stared at the images of devastation with growing understanding of what they were dealing with. "You committed genocide," Zorath said quietly. "We ensured our survival," Vance corrected him. "Because after the Korthini attack, we learned a lesson that we have never forgotten. When someone comes for our children and our homes and our future, we do not negotiate and we do not show mercy." She pointed to other displays showing different alien species, each one accompanied by records of their failed attempts to conquer or destroy humanity. "The Vorthan tried to enslave us for labor, and now their empire is dust," she said. "And the Zelkari tried to harvest our organs for their medical experiments, and we turned their homeworld into glass." Zorath felt cold fear spreading through his body as he understood the truth. These humans were not monsters because they enjoyed killing, but because they had learned through countless generations of conflict that showing weakness meant death. Every species that has entered our space with hostile intent has met the same fate, Vance said, and we keep these records not as trophies, but as warnings. Reminders of what we are capable of when someone threatens our existence. She turned to face Zorath directly, and her eyes were hard as stone. "So now you have to ask yourself a question, Commander. Did you come here as friends or as conquerors? Because the answer will determine whether you leave this space alive." Zorath swallowed hard and realized that he had never truly understood fear until this moment. Commander Vance led the Valkyrie delegation back to the shuttle after the tour of the museum, and Zorath noticed that his officers had grown very quiet as they processed what they had witnessed. But Vance was not finished with them yet. "There is one more thing I want to show you," she said, as the shuttle lifted off from the station. "Something that I think you need to see before you return to your ship and decide what to report to your superiors." The shuttle traveled for several hours through human space, passing orbital platforms and patrol vessels that tracked their movements with obvious vigilance. Zorath watched through the viewport as they approached the outer edge of the human territory, and he noticed that the ship traffic became less frequent as they traveled further from the core worlds. "Where are you taking us?" he finally asked. Vance did not answer immediately, and instead pointed through the viewport at something in the distance. We call it the memorial, and it is where we keep the remains of everyone who tried to destroy us. As the shuttle drew closer, Zorath felt his breath catch in his throat at the sight that greeted him. Thousands of ships floated in the void around the dead moon. Alien vessels of every design imaginable arranged in silent formation like a fleet frozen in time. Science Officer Tilla pressed herself against the viewport with shock on her face. "Commander, I am seeing ships from dozens of different species, some of which I have never encountered in any database." Vance nodded slowly. "Every fleet that came here with hostile intent is preserved in this place, and we maintain them as a memorial to remind ourselves of what we are capable of." The shuttle passed by the wreckage, and Zorath spotted something that made his blood run cold. Valkyrie ships floating among the debris, their distinctive hull markings still visible despite centuries of exposure to the void. "Those are the ships we sent," Krev whispered. "The ones that disappeared over the past 300 cycles." "Yes," Vance confirmed, "and they were not the first to try, and they will not be the last. But the result is always the same." Tilla ran scans on the wreckage with her portable device, and her scales turned pale as she read the results. "Commander, these ships were not destroyed by weapons fire, because there are no blast marks or radiation signatures consistent with naval combat." Vance smiled that cold smile again. "Your species fights wars with ships and missiles and energy weapons, clean and distant with crews who never have to look their enemies in the eyes." She pulled up a holographic display showing tactical data from one of the battles. "When someone invades our space, we fight differently." The display showed a human assault ship latching onto an alien vessel, and Zorath watched with growing horror as armored figures poured through the breach and into the enemy craft. "We board them," Vance explained, "and we go room by room and corridor until every hostile is neutralized." The footage was brutal beyond anything Zorath had ever witnessed. Human soldiers fighting with weapons and fists and teeth against creatures twice their size. He saw a human take multiple wounds that should have been fatal and keep fighting, dragging herself forward with one functioning arm to detonate an explosive that killed a group of enemy soldiers. "How is that possible?" Krev demanded. "Because no creature should be able to continue fighting with such injuries." Vance turned to face him. "You call us prey species because we are small and soft and easily damaged. And every species in this graveyard made that same assumption." She paused, and her voice dropped to something quiet and terrifying. "But we evolved on a death world, Lieutenant. A planet that tried to kill us every single day with predators and diseases and natural disasters and weather that could freeze or burn us alive." The display shifted to show images of Earth and its deadly wildlife, and the Valkyrie watched with disbelief as they saw creatures with massive jaws and venomous fangs and claws that could tear through metal. "We survived all of that," Vance continued, "not because we were stronger or faster, but because we refused to give up. No matter how badly we were hurt or how hopeless the situation seemed." She pointed back at the graveyard of ships. "Every species out there thought they were predators, and we were prey. But they did not understand that prey species do not conquer a death world and spread across the stars." Zorath felt something shift in his understanding as he listened to her words. A realization that these humans were not like any enemy his people had ever faced. "You fight until you die," he said slowly. "No," Vance corrected him. "We fight until our enemies die. Because death does not stop us, and you can kill one of us, and 10 more will take their place. You can kill 100 and 1,000 will rise to avenge them." She moved closer to Zorath until they were almost touching. "You can glass our cities and burn our worlds, and we will crawl out of the rubble and come for you with whatever weapons we can find." The shuttle passed by more wreckage, and Zorath saw the shattered remains of what had once been a massive dreadnought, its hull torn open like paper. "That ship belonged to a species called the Vorthan," Vance said. and they sent their entire war fleet to exterminate humanity 200 years ago. And their fleet numbered over 5,000 vessels against our 300. What happened? Till asked. We won, Vance replied simply, because we attacked their supply lines and ambushed their scouts and boarded their flagships in suicide missions. That cost us everything but gave us victory. The display showed the final battle of that war. Human ships throwing themselves against the Vorthan fleet in desperate attacks that defied all military logic. Your people died by the millions, Krev observed. Yes, Vance agreed, and we mourned every single one of them. But we did not stop fighting until the last Vorthan ship was burning, and their homeworld was nothing but ash. She turned off the display and faced the Valkyrie delegation with an expression that was almost gentle. I'm not telling you this to threaten you, Commander Zorath, but to help you understand what you are dealing with. We are not monsters, and we do not enjoy killing. But we have learned through thousands of years of conflict that the universe does not care if we live or die. So we made ourselves into survivors, beings who will endure any hardship and overcome any obstacle and destroy any enemy that threatens our existence. The shuttle began its return journey to the Eternal Vigil, and Zorath sat in silence as he considered everything he had seen and heard. He had come to the Forbidden Zone seeking answers, and now he understood why no ship had ever returned, not because the humans killed everyone who entered their space, but because those visitors had given them no choice. The question now was what he would do with this knowledge, and whether the Valkyrie Empire would learn from the mistakes of all those dead civilizations or follow them into oblivion. The Eternal Vigil emerged from the Forbidden Zone 3 cycles after departing from human space, and High Commander Zorath stood alone on the observation deck, watching the stars drift past the viewport. He had not slept since leaving the human territory, his mind consumed by everything he had witnessed and the weight of what he had to tell the Elder Council. Commander Vance had allowed them to leave without incident, but her final words to him echoed in his memory. Go home and tell your leaders what you have seen, and pray that they are wise enough to listen. The crew of the Eternal Vigil had changed during their brief time in human space. The confidence and pride replaced by a quiet understanding that they had encountered something beyond their experience. Lieutenant Krev entered the observation deck and stood beside his commander. We have received a transmission from the Homeworld Commander, and the Elder Council demands an immediate report upon our arrival. Zorath nodded slowly. They will want to know about human weaknesses and how to conquer their territory, because that is how the Council thinks. And what will you tell them? Krev asked. Zorath turned to face his lieutenant with exhausted eyes. I will tell them the truth, even though they will not want to hear it. The Eternal Vigil reached the Valkyrie homeworld 2 cycles later, and Zorath was escorted directly to the council chamber where the 12 elders waited with obvious impatience. High Commander Zorath, the eldest counselor, spoke with authority. You have returned from the Forbidden Zone, an achievement that no other commander has accomplished in 300 cycles. Zorath bowed formally. I have, Elder Krath, and I bring news that will change how our empire views that region of space. The counselors leaned forward with eager anticipation. Tell us everything, they demanded, about the enemy that lurks in that darkness and how we can defeat them. Zorath took a deep breath and began his report, describing the thriving civilization they had discovered, the species called humans, and the terrible history that had shaped them into what they were. As he spoke, he watched the expressions of the counselors change from eagerness to confusion to anger. You are saying that these humans are weak creatures with soft bodies and short lifespans. Elder Meth interrupted. So surely, they cannot pose a significant threat to our military. That is precisely what every other species thought, Zorath replied. And now their ships float in a graveyard while their civilizations are dust. He described the Museum of Human Conflict and the records of species that have been completely destroyed after attempting to conquer humanity. The counselors exchanged uneasy glances, but Elder Krath raised a hand for silence. Commander Zorath, we sent you to find weaknesses we could exploit, not to return with tales of human invincibility. They are not invincible, Zorath answered, because they can be killed as easily as any other creature. But that is precisely the problem. He stepped forward and addressed the entire council. The humans have spent their entire existence fighting and dying and rising again. And they have become something that no other species has managed to achieve. What is that? Elder Krath demanded. They have become survivors, Zorath said. Beings who cannot be broken by pain or loss or fear, who will sacrifice everything including their own lives to protect their people. He pulled up images from the human historical archives and displayed them for the council to see. Look at what they did to themselves, he said, showing the devastation of human wars. And understand that any species willing to inflict such suffering on their own kind will have no hesitation about doing the same to us. The council chamber fell silent as the elders absorbed the implications of what they were seeing. Our ships that disappeared over the centuries were not destroyed in honorable combat, Zorath continued, but were boarded and taken by soldiers who fought hand to hand until every Valkyrie on board was dead. That is barbaric, Elder Meth protested. That is humanity, Zorath replied, and they see it not as barbarism but as determination, the willingness to do whatever is necessary to survive. He showed them footage from Commander Vance's records, the brutal boarding actions and the humans who kept fighting despite wounds that should have killed them. Elder Krath watched with narrowing eyes. What do you recommend? Commander, because surely you are not suggesting that we simply abandon our interest in that region of space. Zorath straightened his posture and spoke clearly. I recommend that we reinforce the border markers and triple the warning beacons. And I recommend that we pray to every god we have ever worshipped that the humans never decide to venture into our space. The council erupted in outrage, voices shouting accusations of cowardice and demands for military action. You would have us cower in fear of these soft creatures, Elder Vorn snarled, when the Valkyrie Empire has conquered 100 worlds. Zorath laughed, a hollow broken sound that silenced the chamber. Conquered 100 worlds against enemies, who fought with logic and strategy and the desire to preserve their own lives. He turned to face Elder Vorn directly. These humans do not fight like that, because they do not care if they die as long as their enemy dies with them. Every species that has challenged them thought the same way you do now, that surely such fragile creatures could not stand against a superior military force. He gestured at the images still displayed in the chamber, and now those species exist only as wreckage, orbiting a dead moon while humanity continues to thrive. Elder Krath raised a hand to quiet the other counselors. Let us assume that you are correct, Commander, and that these humans are as dangerous as you claim. So what would happen if we simply ignored them? Zorath considered the question carefully. Commander Vance told me something before I left. Something that I believe we should take very seriously. What did she say? The elder asked. She said that humans do not seek out conflict with other species, but when conflict is brought to them, they respond with overwhelming force. Zorath paused before delivering his final warning. As long as we leave them alone, they will leave us alone, but the moment we threaten them or their territory, they will not stop until one of our civilizations no longer exists. The chamber fell silent again, and Zorath could see the war between pride and fear playing out on the faces of the counselors. Finally, Elder Krath spoke. Your recommendations are noted, Commander Zorath, and we will take them under advisement, but you are dismissed while we deliberate. Zorath bowed and turned to leave, but he paused at the door. If any ship ever returned from that region of space in the future, do not ask them what they saw. Why not? Elder Krath asked. Because seeing what I have seen changes a person, Zorath replied, and you might not like what looks back at you from the survivor's eyes. He walked out of the chamber and did not look back. knowing that he had done everything he could to warn his people. Whether they listened or not was no longer in his hands. As he made his way through the corridors of the Capitol building, Zora thought about Commander Vance and her cold smile and the terrible truth she had revealed. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy, nor the fastest or the most advanced, but they possessed something that no other civilization had ever managed to develop. They had the will to endure anything and the determination to destroy anyone who threatened their survival. In the dark between the stars, Zorath realized the galaxy's greatest predators had learned a terrible truth. They were not the hunters, and they had simply never encountered anything worth hunting them back. Until now. And as he walked alone through the empty corridors, High Commander Zorath found himself hoping that his people would be wise enough to heed his warning, because the alternative was too terrible to imagine. The Forbidden Zone would remain forbidden, and the humans would continue their vigil among the stars, waiting for the next foolish species to cross their borders and learn the lesson that so many had learned before. Some prey fights back, and humanity had been fighting back since before they could speak.